What does EdTech mean to you?
Empowering the learners to fulfill their learning needs and potential. So we are incorporating technology very carefully from the implementation perspective as well as the pedagogy perspective. What is the purpose for which I am implementing this technology? And then measure if that purpose is being met and not whether some other purpose has been satisfied.
Hello everyone, I am Pankaj Chavan. I work in the Digital Learning Solution project at Kotak Education Foundation, where we cater to the low income and resource constrained schools in Mumbai. And my work majorly focuses on creating and sustaining digital ecosystem in these schools. So how do we do it? So we do it through strengthening the digital teaching learning infrastructure in the schools and also through the capacity building of teachers in effective integration of technology in teaching and learning. I'm so excited to have Professor Sridhar Iyer in today's episode of KEF Kaarvaan. He is a professor in the educational technology program at IIT Bombay, and it's the same place where I have also completed my doctoral studies. So I'm really very excited to have you in today's episode. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Pankaj, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Professor Sridhar has been the faculty member at IIT Bombay since 1999. He is also the president of EdTech Society in India, and he is a recipient of many prestigious awards like from ACM India and AECT International for his contribution in the field of EdTech and computing education. He has conceptualized and led some development projects as well like Computer Masti and Project Oscar. So today I am going to discuss about the topic which both of us are always excited about, which is EdTech and its impact on education. I'll start by looking a little back into the past and asking you about your journey from there. So you were a part of the group which started EdTech program at IIT Bombay, and you have been working in this space more than a decade now. So how did it all start, and how did you get involved in education and technology? Was it because of your computer science background, some innate interest in the field of education and technology, or any personal experiences or challenges that you faced led you to take this step and be part of a group who is doing such awesome work?
Okay, that's a very big question. I came to IIT Bombay in '99 because we were starting a distance education program. That was my main interest. Before that, I had already discovered that I like to do teaching, and so I was interested in becoming part of this distance education program. So at that time, I was in computer science, and we were working towards building networks and distance education network in the country and so on. So in fact, ours was the first distance education program in the country, which was set up by Professor Phatak. We had a lot of remote centers, and we had a satellite network through which all the transmission was going on, and I was one of the instructors in the program. Many of my students at that time were doing networking research around this distance education setup. Then what happened was that around 2008 or 9, we started discussing that we need to do more than simply an outreach of education. We need to start doing research in education. So the then senior faculty, including Professor Vasi, Professor Phatak, Professor Kannan, Professor Shevgaonkar, many of them, along with some of us, so myself and Professor Sahana Murthy, we tried to frame the curriculum for a PhD program in education technology. And that's how it started. In 2010, we started the PhD program in education technology. Yeah. So for a while, I was both in computer science and in education technology. But then slowly I realized that I want to move closer and closer to how learning happens rather than simply build technology to facilitate education. So I moved as an internal appointment from computer science to education technology. And eventually I moved fully to ET. Yeah. That's the story.
Okay. It was interesting to listen about your journey and even how the EdTech program has shaped up over these years. I have a very fundamental question for you. What does EdTech mean to you?
So EdTech means different things to different people, as you rightly pointed out. To me, EdTech means empowering the learners to fulfill their learning needs and potential. And this is the teacher also plays a very important role in this ecosystem. So the edtech is not separate from the use of the teacher. So if you look very in the ancient days, the teacher was the edtech who was actually providing the education, looking at what the learner needs are, setting up activities for the learner to learn. So if in the ideal situation, today there's a lot of talk about personalized adaptive learning systems. That's one of the holy grail of our edtech technology enabled learning. But if you see, the best personalized adaptive learning system is one teacher and one student, because the teacher knows exactly what's going on, how to adapt the learning, and the teacher can situate the learning in the context of the student. So to me, edtech means use of technology in a meaningful way to support the learning of the student by the teacher.
Yeah, interesting. So, but how do you envision teachers and learners, let's say, in a technology-enabled classroom? So, I got your point where you talked about teacher being the tech and then how it evolved over a period of time. But let's say we assume a technology-enabled classroom. So, how do you envision teachers and learners there? What are their roles, and how do you see teacher and student agency in such context?
That's a very good question, because a lot of efforts towards edtech is kind of taking away the agency. So I'm glad that you asked about how to bring agency into the classroom. So see, the teacher agency has to be in terms of the teacher being able to recognize what is relevant for their students in their own context. Now, the most common example is that, let's say I teach networking, and there are thousands of good lectures available on networking. So why should I go and do yet another lecture on networking in my class? So the flip side of that argument is that the existing lectures are not tuned to my students. So the teacher agency has to be in terms of letting the teacher adapt existing materials. So just like we used to have multiple textbooks, it's not enough to simply have a textbook.
Yeah.
You still needed the teacher to help the student assimilate what was written in the textbook. So now instead of the textbook, we have videos. But you still need the teacher to help the student to assimilate what is there in the content that is being delivered in the videos. So that is the aspect of teacher agency that excites me. So in terms of learner agency, the student now has a lot more freedom in order to be able to choose what they want to learn. So earlier it used to be very set curriculum, and what was there in the book was all that you could teach. But now with the proliferation of social media and all that, learners can get information from various areas. So one of the things that we have done in our department is to create a model by which this learning can be structured. So we call these as learning extension trajectories. So what the teacher can do is create multiple trajectories so that learners can choose whichever trajectory appeals to them for deepening their learning or broadening their learning from a given starting point in a topic.
So, interesting to know about this learning extension trajectories and how it's being operationalized here. You talked about one thing which you said meaningful use of edtech, let's say, for example. So, what according to you is meaningful integration of technology in a teaching learning setting? So, what does that meaningful word means to you?
So meaningful to me means that we are not incorporating technology for technology's sake or for the sake of some futuristic benefit that we are going to get out of it. So we are incorporating technology very carefully, where we look at the context and we say, okay, what is the appropriate technology to use in this context?
Okay.
Both from the implementation perspective as well as the pedagogy perspective. Like, for example, simply because there is this new fancy technology called VR does not mean that we should run away into creating a lot of VR products. So we have to see that is this technology meeting the needs of the learner. So one way of thinking about it is to use what we call as the technology enhanced learning metrics. So technology primarily can help us in 4 different ways. So one way we call is the effectiveness, where the focus is on the learning. So technology helps to improve the learning. It helps student to be more engaged in the learning. Another aspect of technology is attractiveness, where it actually attracts the learner. So a lot of these game-based learning, VR environments, they are high on attractiveness,
Right.
but they may not be equally high on effectiveness.
Got it.
So they bring the learners to the system, but whether learning happens or not is something which has to be measured separately. Then there is the issue of efficiency. So when we talk about creating MOOCs and when we talk about creating large scale programs, we are actually addressing the problem of efficiency. We want to transmit and reach a larger audience.
Yeah.
And then there is the idea of accessibility. So accessibility is making it accessible to more people. So the technology is used to make it accessible to more people. So accessibility may have multiple dimensions. It could be on age, it could be on gender, it could be on language. So a lot of efforts which are going on towards translation, all of those target accessibility. So what is important to keep in mind when we say meaningful use of technology is to clearly identify what is the purpose for which I am implementing this technology, and then measure if that purpose is being met and not whether some other purpose has been satisfied.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, so this technology enhanced learning metric, and you talked about effectiveness, efficiency, attractiveness, and accessibility as 4 parameters we should consider, right? So I was more curious about this accessibility piece. So let's say whether there is access to the technology or not. But then there are certain environments where the resources are not available, and these are the resource constrained environments that we have. So in such scenarios, how can we effectively leverage edtech, and how can we look at how to effectively bring in those technologies into the classroom, and what best we can do with that? So what are your thoughts on these things?
So there are 2-3 ways in which we can address this. One way is to reach the content to the classroom. Okay, so good quality content, making good quality content reach to the classroom, making it available. So we have this national program on technology enhanced learning, NPTEL, right? So in the initial days, that was the goal. To simply, content was not available, so content was being made available in the form of video lectures.
Yeah.
And then the accessibility becomes so that, okay, now it is accessible in terms of being able to watch the lecture. But that does not mean that they are able to understand the lecture or being able to apply the learning. Okay. So now there are other technologies which are there. Like if you look at non-resource constrained environments, often people will talk about having one device per person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of interventions are designed around having that one device per person. But now in a resource constrained environment, you may not have one device per person. So what can be done there? So there, if you see, there the teacher plays a crucial role. So what the teacher can do is that they can simulate that interaction for the entire class. So to take an example, let's say we are asking the student to work with a simulation. Okay, so let's say it's a simple physics simulation. And there we are asking the student to change some parameters and observe what is happening, maybe the trajectory, how the trajectory changes with respect to time or with respect to velocity and so on. So now, when every student does not have a device, for whatever reason, either due to resource constraints or due to even the rules of the school, what you can have is that the teacher can play part of the simulation on the board and pause it as a crucial point. So it's one thing to play a video completely. So that is one way of using technology. It is, to me, it's not a very meaningful way of using technology. You just play the video and assume that the students will understand from that video. So the meaningful way in which the teacher can do that is to play it for a certain bit, pause the video, and then ask the students what is going to happen next. So they are made to do a predict. Once they make a prediction, then you can play another piece and ask them to see whether their prediction came true or not. And if it didn't come true, that is where the interesting thing is, because that's where a lot of learning happens, that why your prediction didn't come true. So attempting to explain what those predictions were, why those predictions were correct or incorrect, that is where the learning happens. So this learning can be done with one projector and one laptop which the teacher is using in the class, but the students can still get equivalent learning as though they have actually manipulated the simulation on their own.
Yeah, so this is really very insightful. So, but how do you see this edtech products thing in the current market? So, I'll ask it in a bit of a different way. So, you have been working in edtech research from many years, right? So, how much of that do you think has actually translated into practical implementation? And the current edtech product segment, if you are looking at, how much of that actually exists there?
The edtech landscape is changing very fast. Okay, so what I say today may not be true tomorrow, but and what was true yesterday is no longer true today. But if you look at yesterday, a lot of edtech companies were highly tech focused. So there was not so much of it was that the idea was that okay, I have the tech, so now the problem is solved. Okay. So there was not so much emphasis on the pedagogy, nor was there any emphasis on the evaluation, on setting up metrics on which you will evaluate whether the tech is doing the job that you want it to do, not some job. So that was yesterday. Today, if you see, a lot of edtech companies have moved on from there and they have got to a point where they understand the need of the pedagogy. So, because there are multiple solutions, and tech is no longer the differentiator between these solutions. A lot of companies are now saying that, look, my pedagogy is the differentiator. Okay. So some have activities built in, some have more engaging formats. So the pedagogy is got incorporated into the products to a large extent. And even though sometimes the pedagogy is rudimentary and it is kind of ad hoc, there are many products where the pedagogy is actually evidence based, which the research has established that this is a meaningful pedagogy. Tomorrow, when we look at tech companies, now this pedagogy again, it is not going to be the main differentiator. So the consumer is going to start asking for proof, evidence of impact. Okay, evidence that your product actually does what you set out to do. So I think now a lot of edtech companies are moving towards establishing that their product actually works. So evaluation studies, impact assessments. So that expertise is also becoming necessary for an edtech company.
So as we were discussing about COVID and how teachers were kind of forced to use technology tools for online teaching and all of this, what IITB did during that time? I mean, if you can talk about that and elaborate on that a bit.
So at that time, what happened was IITB director asked us as ET department, of which you were also a part at that time, to create something for helping instructors move to online teaching. So by that time, we'd already created this learner-centric MOOC model using which teachers can create good quality MOOCs. Okay. So what we did was we adapted that model for the purpose of online teaching, synchronous online teaching, instead of keeping it only for asynchronous online teaching. So we created this teaching program or training resources called OTeach, which was released into the open, and it had several sections on how to create your videos, how to create activities, how to create group discussions, as well as how to give different resources for learners to um, take their learning ahead. We created this resource, and it was, I think, accessed by a large number of colleges, a few, maybe 30,000 views and so on. And then what IITB said was that they wanted us to create a training program for training the TAs also to use this resource. That's where you came in, and you did the work of creating a training program for TAs. And that's basically what we did at IITB.
Yeah, and I think that's how in digital learning solution project at KEF we also kind of leveraged on that. We adapted the same OTeach program. So during online also, we kind of a 3-year program called OTeach at Digital Learning Solution Project, where we train them on multiple things, right from constructive alignment, where we train them on how the learning outcomes, instructional activities, and assessment should be aligned, how to kind of augment technology tools, simple technology tools, considering this framework in mind. And then we also train them on TPAC framework, which is technological, pedagogical, content, knowledge framework. And then the third year is where we look at the sustainability piece of it, where we train them on open educational resources. So it's not only they are getting restricted to what we are training them on, they are getting exposed to multiple open source edtech tools, open source content, and they are using these resources for their teaching learning. And we are also training them on classroom research, where they are conducting classroom research, where they're identifying what is the problem in their teaching learning setting, and how they can address that using technology, how to collect data, and all those kind of things. Yeah, so I mean, definitely,
So
I was part of that OTeach. This OTeach came here and evolved in a very different fashion.